Welcome to Show Studio. It's Milan Fashion Week and we're here to talk about the Prada show. There's so much to talk about in relation to Prada at the moment. I feel like there's a lot to talk about in relation to Milan in general. It's become a much more exciting city in terms of analysis compared to what it was a few seasons ago. I think particularly because of Gucci really upping their game, but it's a really interesting city and it's an interesting time also for Prada, I think, as a brand. There's a lot that's been written about from a business perspective, talking about the difficulties that they're having and what have you, but I do think they're at a time of change, particularly in relation to sort of how they're embracing the internet, how they're embracing how they communicate their brand. So there's lots and lots to unpick, and I've got a great set of panellists with me, very chic and stylish, to unpick what's been going on in Italy and also to help me evaluate the Spring Summer 17 show. But before we dive in, I'll just let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Harriet.
I'm Harriet Quick, I'm an editor and journalist.
I'm Emma Farrow and I'm the head of design at Finery.
I'm Levi Palmer and I'm one half of Palmer Harding.
And I'm the other half, Mackie Harding.
Hi guys, thank you for coming. I want to go first from a kind of design perspective, because a lot of people talk about Prada as like the designer's design, Miuccia Prada as the designer's designer. Are you all big fans of Prada? Do you think is she up there as the one who's pushing fashion forward, who design is constantly referenced? Or
I when I was a student at St Martin's, it definitely was one of the brands, and Nicola Geschi and Balenciaga were like the two iconic ones as a student.
Yeah.
Having our own business for the last 5 years, it kind of over time you kind of try as you might try and close yourself off from some of that. But I think she's always influencing a younger generation through.
Yeah. What's your take on it?
Oh, I just love Prada.
You love it?
I've always loved Prada, even before I actually became a designer.
Yeah.
When I was at college, and I was thinking about this yesterday before coming here, and thinking about the influence and infiltration she had. Even when I was a student, I was a textile student, with all of the nylon backpacks and all of the belts, and it was just the thing to have. But I just think she's really innovative. I think she creates theatre and drama, and I just love the way she reinvents clothes for the woman. I just think she's amazing.
Is she, how, all of those positive qualities, they in some ways feel like they're slightly out of step with how the business is running today. Like her collections are incredibly seasonal, very, very seasonal, which is something I'd like to talk about, which is very much out of step in some ways with how a lot of other people are running their businesses, where it's kind of, particularly using Gucci as an example, just as a fellow kind of Milan Fashion Week brand, each piece merges with the piece, it's really hard to tell them apart. Her collections are very, very seasonal, and they are also ones that grow on you. You often look at them. I think that's why, going back to what you were saying, or why things like St Martin students love them, or other designers, because they maybe take a little while to settle in and to make you sort of.
But do you think that's maybe a problem now? Because when I was a student, which I won't date myself.
When was that?
I graduated in May 2010.
Yeah, that's not that.
It's not too long.
Yeah,
but obviously then we weren't on Instagram. We weren't barely on Facebook. I think we were still using MySpace even. Well, maybe not 2010. But now everything's so fast that you don't really have that time to let things sink in.
Yeah.
So you kind of, it's really hard to have this like a concept or something that's so to a season have time to really sink in.
Sure.
So it becomes, I think, a bit more tricky.
Yeah.
I think, say, from her last collection, it's so curated, the show, and it's such a look that you get caught up in the drama of that, but then it's quite hard to associate it with you and your real life, and it's kind of only when you start to see the clothes in the store, you can take the elements from the look and think, actually that shirt is amazing. So I'd really like that.
I think that's why it's such a successful brand. It's like we were discussing this last night, is that in terms of the show, I think you see a lot of styling, maybe gimmicks per se, whereas if you break it apart and look at individual pieces, they're actually really easy to wear, easy to insert into your wardrobe, easy to wear in real life, and maybe aren't actually as directional as the designers imagine, but it's just the hyper styling that makes it a lot more directional.
Yeah, more directional. That is interesting. It's also, you use the word theatre, and I think that's very relevant as well. Like these amazing moments of kind of intense drama that she creates at the time of her shows.
Yeah.
What's your take on it? Because there's been so much talk also as well, like the difficult times for Prada. What do you make of all of that?
I always think, oh my goodness, you know, Mrs. Prada's sort of in her mid-60s, I think. And you think how amazing that she continues to be, and her team, such like tastemakers and so innovative. And leads fashion when maybe other people of her group are sort of taking a slower pace, maybe. I mean, with respect to the business of Prada, I think you always have to take into account the big expansion in retail and how much that has impacted on the bigger financial picture. Because often we just look at it and think, oh, actually, well, does that mean the actual collections aren't selling very well? But I think there's that huge bigger picture about the huge expansion they had, particularly in Asia.
Because people have been very critical of that they opened too many stores and were over ambitious. And do you think that is part of the problem, not quick enough to embrace online?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that from kind of obviously thinking of online retail, which you are an expert in. But do you think that was part of the problem for Prada? There was an interesting piece in talking about, you know, their new strategy, because obviously I think their growth is at the lowest it's been for 5 years, and they were talking about how they're attempting to get millennials, and a part of it was, you know, being more open with their online offer. You know, obviously they've now launched on Net-a-Porter, Mr. Porter, which was a big moment, I think, for them. Trying to make more products available online. Do you think it was just Prada were just too slow to embrace? They're also talking about expanding their social media to try and make things...
I think they were too slow and just too exclusive, you know, and it's like finding that balance, isn't it, between being aspirational and desirable and designer, but you do have to embrace, you know, the e-commerce side as well, because it was frustrating, wasn't it, because you couldn't actually see the collection on their own website. You couldn't get the commercial mood for the brand. It was always just the, you know, catwalk vision. And I just think, you know, it's a great move forward to, you know, be on Net-a-Porter and just be more readily available, and with the social media, and just maybe to expand their reach.
Yeah, do you think it is the case that it's just that constant trouble, isn't it, between keeping, part of the reason we probably all love Prada is it does always feel a little bit lofty, a little bit exclusive. But then it's just like, if people actually can't buy your clothes.
If you can't actually see it, that's a problem, isn't it? If you can't actually find the clothes and understand what the DNA is of the collection, then you can't, because not everyone is going to go into their stores, and so it becomes a bit exclusive, I think.
And that's kind of the interesting part, and I think in any, from a design perspective, is kind of seeing that kind of product lifestyle from conception to kind of how someone else is going to interpret it. And if you don't see that reaction, I think there's a new way of, not necessarily a new way of looking at design, but I think it's a more embraced way of looking at it in terms of a consumer, rather than being, because I mean Prada, it's always been more artistic, like the Guess-Guess of the world. And there's a lot of younger generation of designers who maybe like ourselves, who went through uni thinking like that, but then now in the real world are much more conscious of the consumer and wanting to communicate directly to the consumer, which Prada's not already, I mean, they could obviously have a consumer they communicate to, but it's in a different kind of perspective, I guess.
I also just think you don't think of it as a young brand. I think that's part of it. When I think of amazing women that I know who wear Prada, they are of a certain age and very successful women, very artistic, amazing taste level. And I guess it's very difficult, because obviously that's a really important part of Prada, and part of the appeal is not just idolising the collection, but idolising those women, the kind of women that wear Prada. And it's like, how do they then appeal to a younger audience without in any way lessening that sense of it being...
Well, it's difficult. I mean, we have our fit model, Gracia, she's 19 and from Dallas, and I remember having this conversation when all the talk about their sales and the press was out a year ago, I guess. And she was saying, oh, well, you know, she likes Prada, but she thinks of Prada bags, for instance, as like something a sexy soccer mom would wear.
Oh, really?
And a 19-year-old doesn't really want to be associated with a sexy soccer mom because of the oversaturation of their classic bags. And while I think designers look maybe towards the runway show, the average consumer is seeing Prada represented by that sexy soccer bag, sexy
really
soccer mom.
Oh, so maybe that goes back to what we were saying about them communicating better online. Do you think if it was, we were talking about this yesterday on the Gucci panel with how they do their social media and how clever they've been with kind of really getting their vision all across
and it's
the
who's
web.
wearing it.
Who's wearing it, exactly. Maybe the Prada thing is it's just not seen enough in the right context.
No. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
It was interesting they did the See Now, Buy Now bag for last season.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know how well that performed in terms of immediate sales.
Because I do think See Now, Buy Now, going back to what we were all saying at the start, I just don't think of it as something that suits Prada as a brand, because as we were all saying, like those collections, that they're difficult, they're quite prickly. Like it is the one when you're at the shows that all the reviewers, even the most seasoned fashion journalists, will say, oh, I need to go away and think about that. You know, sometimes you're at a certain show and you can write your review pretty much while you're there. There's not going to be like a light bulb moment like 2 hours after while you're having a bowl of pasta and you're like, oh, that's what it was about. With Prada, it's so hard, and I think if it's hard to analyse it, it's definitely going to be hard to buy it. It needs to settle in, and I just wonder how they'll work.
But do you think that goes back to also why they're not attracting a younger consumer? Because if it takes that long to process, people are flicking and they want something, they want to get it instantly.
It's the light generation. You want to be able to understand it and click heart
and immediate.
I think with a lot of shows I have to go back. I do, you know, because there's so many. You can't just process it, any of them really. Maybe it's different for Gucci now because it's, you know, really established and you kind of know what to expect and know it's not going to dramatically change. But for a lot of the other ones, it's kind of, I don't know if I like them or not because there's so much information and there's so much fashion all the time.
Earlier on, like when there's like 48, 70, whatever looks, you kind of get to 10 and you're like,
I just can't shop that quickly. I would like, even if I was given a budget to buy stuff on Cena, I think I'd be like, oh, I'd be stressed.
What was Burberry, like 132 looks?
Yeah, it was crazy.
How could you decide what the thing was that you wanted immediately? It would really stress me out, I think.
But maybe that is the strategy that they'll do, will be with the accessories and the bags, and they'll continue to do that. What do you think of all the See Now, Buy Now stuff? It's really hard. Like, I feel like I've talked about it so much, but I'm really intrigued by what everyone thinks.
I'm just really curious to know whether it does
buying them.
Actually ship a product.
Outside
of the fashion obsessive, does it really work?
I mean, we find, we have a really small e-commerce, but we held back our autumn winter imagery and only started releasing it on Instagram and social media, things like that, when it was available. And even just from our end, it felt much more exciting to kind of talk about it then, rather than kind of talk about it for 6 months and then, oh, that thing we talked about for 6 months, it's now here.
We've not released our resort imagery yet, and we've had people from the show, like we've had direct messages on Instagram saying, oh, this is great, where can I get it? And it's like, well, that's spring summer 17.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because a lot of the talk about it has been that it's going to really damage young brands and brands that, you know, don't have the biggest infrastructure. But actually, I guess in a way, for a brand like you, where you do have a close relationship with your customer, maybe it's a good thing, because it means you can be more communicative.
The thing is, those images, so if you really want to find it, you can find like our spring summer show, but by kind of purposely not pushing it out there until it's available, it kind of, when it is there and you can start communicating, it just makes it, even just as a brand, it makes it more exciting for us to talk about. And I think that's part of it.
And I don't know for us personally if the whole See Now, Buy Now thing is, I think it is relevant or it's good for consumers. I think it's more about like, do it now, hold on to it, and show it when it's ready. You know, it's rather than just giving them that immediacy and that reveal. Because at the end of the day, like these shows, yes, they're huge marketing aspects, but they're really for the industry, for us to be able to sell. And it's kind of become these convoluted like beings of their own. Yeah,
you do need two shows. I mean, you show press, and then you have a separate like consumer-facing spectacle.
But the whole kind of See Now, Buy Now, it's also, it makes me think of like, you know, like chocolate bars at the checkout. It's like a panic buy. Like, it's like, oh, I need it now.
I know, you always get what you don't want. You're like, oh, Snickers.
You instantly regret it. So like, are we going to get a lot of that? See Now, Buy Now, regret it quite quickly.
But I wonder the long-term effect it will have on design, because thinking it's interesting that you kind of mentioned Gasquier into this conversation, because there are certain designers, and Prada is definitely one of them, where they move the wider fashion conversation forward. Even if you don't realise it at the time, you notice that they will do something, and it however subtly or however specifically, just slightly kicks the mood in a different direction. And I wonder just if people are having to cater so quickly to people, whether that sense of people provoking and pushing forward will go away. That's one thing that I just think about quite a lot, because it's like, obviously it's good to be responsive to the customer, and there's this big argument that see now buy now is more respectful to the consumer and it actually makes things relevant to them. But then I also think you have to, in a way that's not good. In a way it's great to have collections that are built just in terms of thinking about design.
Yeah. But there's a very few brands, I mean, people like Prada can obviously. Yeah. It's only really those big brands that commercially can do that as well. Yeah. Which, I mean, when you see so many young designers try to emulate those kind of brands and be artistic, and then they're gone in 3 seasons. So as a young brand, you have to kind of be patient in order to get to that point.
Or even changing your infrastructure, like when these whole seasonality topics started really bubbling in February, we had been speaking about like, oh, should we try and move our main collection to resort season, or should we try and implement all these different changes? But we aren't at a position where we're leaders of the industry, and we kind of have to follow, will press be there, will other buyers be there? And so until, I guess, some other people, like, Vetements, they're really a young label still, but they have a lot of pull in the industry, so they can change things, and if other brands start following suit, then we can go that way too. But
it's the way, but that's why it's interesting with Prada that they haven't been more forceful in creating a system that suits them better, because, as we said, they were slow on the e-commerce uptake, and I feel like even just in terms of, the mood of the moment, which, as you said, it's very seasonless, it's also very producty. I was thinking, like, obviously, because we were looking at the Gucci show yesterday, it's so rich in terms of entry-level product. Like, obviously not entry-level because it's very expensive, but like, there's so much costume jewellery, little bits and bobs.
It's a bit more accessible.
It is, and Saint Laurent obviously did that incredibly well when Eddie Slimane was there, and I wonder, all these kind of moods that seem to be working very well for brands, so them not relying too much just on traditional shoes and handbags, but like trying to grow all categories, doesn't feel like that's something that Prada are particularly, like, I can't think of seeing a lot of people, like those ball earrings that they did were amazing, but it didn't feel like suddenly everyone was wearing them. There's not a lot of accessories in terms of stuff, you know what I mean? Like, I wonder
But that's interesting, because like there's brands like Prada who are very innovative, but there's very few brands that actually think of business in a new, innovative way. I mean, people like Burberry or whoever, who are kind of, maybe their product's not the most innovative, but trying different formats. Well, they do nice trenches. I mean, that's where you're going to go to buy a trench. But it's commendable to kind of keep trying, different ways of communicating and trying to push. Because as creators, you're going to be innovative in not just in design, but in every way you operate.
That's why Comme des Garçons is so interesting. Because Ray Kawakube, like, amazing collections that are always so incredible, but then also as a business, like, absolutely fascinating. You think of like like Dover Street Market, amazing, but also all the different Comme diffusions and the way that they've managed to sell all of these like teeny little wallets and stuff and be so prolific in terms of. Everyone has them, but they still have this real sense of being exclusive. I think it's really fascinating. So what's the answer for what if you had to give them, if they called you in and were like, how can we improve our strategy, what would you say? There's something they need to do better.
There just needs to be so many intertwining tiers of like, as you're saying, like lots of product, things that will be there for the real collection lovers and buyers in the time that it arrives in store. And different ways to access it. It's quite a big, complicated mechanism to be able to manufacture, produce, operate, see now, buy now, and satisfy all that love of discovery for a different type of customer at the time of the season.
Yeah, it's incredibly. It's one of those things where everything has to fall into place in the right way. It's really hard to do.
I think a big part of it that we've kind of touched on is, I think designers who kind of have their business based in a product that they're not really showing on the catwalk as much. I mean, obviously they show their bags with Prada, but people like Dries, like, we've always really respected because his collections are beautiful and you can buy it all in the shop. You buy everything, But Prada, you can buy the bags. It's really difficult, like we were saying earlier on, it's difficult to actually find the clothing.
Do you think that is old-fashioned, operating in that way?
It feels like a lie, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but it's important, like you said, you kind of need that in the industry to help push things forward, but it's also difficult in terms of building these kind of brand messages and filling in these gaps, because you kind of need that to be part of the conversation, because otherwise it's kind of, here's an image, buy a bag, it feels really disconnected in like today.
Yeah, which is going back to what I was saying about Eddie Slimane at Saint Laurent. One of the things that I found like fascinating about that brand was the way that the growth and the amazing sales figures, they were across all categories. So it wasn't, it is this kind of unsaid thing in fashion of like, oh, who's actually going to wear the clothes? Everyone's just going to buy the bag. But actually, it was clothes that were selling, and footwear, and bags, and accessories.
And Gucci now as well.
And it's same with Gucci, and I feel like that is a really modern way of doing a brand. This idea of relying too much on this kind of secret thing of like, show something nice to sell a black handbag is maybe not working in the same way anymore.
I think people have just because of social media, people have caught on to marketing, and they know when they're being sold to, and people don't like being sold to. No one liked the traditional way of selling prior to the internet, when someone knocked on your door trying to sell you encyclopedias. Why would you like it now? And this is just almost feels like the modern version of the encyclopedia salesman.
Yeah, that's very true actually. It's this kind of like, I think people, they're just much more savvy, much more informed. They don't like being hoodwinked in any way. But
I guess it's also interesting to think about that younger customer. Is it successful at Miu Miu?
Yeah.
With all
I don't even think Miu Miu is young. That's the thing.
I don't think it's
Miu Miu, it's interesting because they obviously launched the new fragrance and they're trying to. But with Miu Miu, I guess it's because it's not really. It's like it's a little sister line. But it's kind of not. The prices aren't significantly cheap.
It used to be, didn't it? It used to be, and it feels like everything has just got so out of reach.
Yeah, very expensive
for both of the brands, and they're very. The aesthetics have changed.
But it's strange because Miu Miu, it should be so on point. So if you think how like girlish and embellished and like glitzy and saccharine, a lot of the work of sort of, it really felt like that in London. So the mood of fashion is very much like that. So Miu Miu should be sort of at the forefront with that, but maybe Gucci are doing it in a slightly more eccentric way, or like I don't know why it is that.
I don't know.
It's
I just wonder whether with Gucci it's more about the great classics and the pieces, together they're creating an amazing look, but the pieces separately, they're just things that we know, and it's different with Miu Miu. It's very, very, very overworked and very complicated.
With Gucci.
And very in its season,
yes,
isn't it?
It's in its season, the colour of the season.
I
don't think they feel like they have a long life in your wardrobe. You'd feel outdated quite quickly.
Gucci's still kind of, although the clothes have a timelessness to it, there's still an excitement in the industry and commercially because it's still a new proposition. It's only quite recently that they had a massive revamp really, so there's still that excitement which Miu Miu doesn't have that.
No.
So I think that's also part of the excitement around Gucci, is also that kind of new perspective.
But then if we're saying that seasonless is a really sort of sensible way of operating and a savvy business way of operating, does that not feed back into the discussion we were having about it being quite tricky to innovate? Because one of the things that is so appealing about a collection by someone like Prada or Rei Kawakubo or whoever is that it's like this single statement. It's like this proposition, this artistic proposition, and you're like, oh wow, how amazing. And it can be very different to the season before, and that's what's so, like, I guess particularly as like a writer, particularly appealing about it, is it gives you something to think about. But if you're doing a seasonal collection, it just doesn't pack that same, a seasonless collection, it doesn't pack that same punch, because it's an evolution, so you're never going to leave. I love what Gucci do, I think it's amazing, but you don't necessarily leave a Gucci show being like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, or like, that was really strange, or with a new concept.
But then I guess with some seasonless designers, I mean, you have to think about the ones who work mainly in the range of blacks, so like Yoji and Rick. I mean, they're seasonless designers, but I would say especially Rick Owens shows are always
That's a really good point.
impactful, and I think they're the classic, they're innovators, I think, but they've innovated in they've carved their own path, whereas I think a lot of other ones who go seasonless have maybe like, oh, let's do something nostalgic because people are comfortable with that, and we know it's gonna work into some sort of trend of within the press or within buyers' decisions.
But with Com, like, isn't that also, when you think about it, they show a very edited directional collection, so it's instant, it's easy. It's not easy, but it's because it's so short, it's much less to kind of digest, so you can get that punch, but then they can also do their kind of more classic lines and show that and have it more as a seasonless product. So they kind of, because they so show their clothing, it's almost like that kind of, they have that balance there.
Yeah, the show for Com, it's almost like a performance art piece, like it just feels completely...
And it would be sad, wouldn't it, to lose that?
Yeah,
I think so.
I'd be really sad.
I think so.
Yeah, I think, but how does it evolve? How
Yeah, it's whether, I wonder if it is whether the runways become these different things. So maybe, like, it's interesting because Prada is a brand that is so tied to the art world. They have the amazing Prada Foundation. Like, if you go to Milan, the gallery, the gallery they have is incredible, really interesting collaborations, and it's whether the kind of directional work that they do becomes these other things, these installations, these performances, and then I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer is. It's just, it's such a tricky time for brands, and it's interesting. It's a particularly tricky time for big brands as well. That's the thing, is it does feel.
For small brands, you can be more malleable as well. Actually, you can adapt quite quickly. Whereas big brands, there's so much infrastructure. You have to kind of really plan in advance, and things are moving so quickly. Especially now in the UK, you know, like there's a lot that could potentially change. That you have to be really malleable. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Should we have a look at the show? We can have a quick look. The video is quite bad quality, so we can have a quick look to give us an idea of the set. So it's the same set that they did for the men's show. So it's quite space agey, and they're climbing up this big ramp and then going back down the other ramp. But I think if we watch it on this, it's going to be too blurred. So we can have a look at the looks just on. But you get a sense of the going for a hike. The men's show, which was kind of a similar vibe, very, very, very layered, and but lots of those kind of bad technical fabrics that we were talking about, which are very, very Prada. And it was all this kind of concept of travel and going on journeys and having everything you needed with you for those things. So I think this is kind of very much building off that. But that first look is so Prada in that sense, you know.
It's kind of quite iconic almost.
Which is weird because we were all saying it's a very seasonal brand, but you definitely have this idea of a Prada look. You know, you could recognise a catwalk look and say, oh, that's Prada. I think it is that kind of, it's a certain chilliness, it's the strange, unexpected fabrics.
I wonder also with that choice of music, there's something quite kind of almost like sad about it, and opening with a distinctive Prada look is that kind of, maybe I'm reading too much into that.
But no, I think you're right, because it was really weird. They did, you're going to
I think it's true, because it's a futuristic, but it's quite a brutalist setting. Maybe done in glass and chrome, but it's still a very brutalist setting.
Very much. And it's interesting because the sort of sailor collection that they do is so heroic and kind of theatrical and very much like weather the storm, whereas this is more melancholy. It is really, so can we go back to number 4? Because it is very signature Prada, like, you know, that little kind of like beige cardigan, you think of like 1996.
Colours. So I remember the first Prada ad I ever saw when I was young, like in the Harper's, with the big plastic like red and blue colours on it, and I just remember that being such an iconic image.
It looks like it's sort of oscillating between the sort of consciously boring beige matte blue thing and the sort of fabulous frivolity of a marabou trimmed pyjama.
Very much so,
and these sort of schoolgirl classics.
Well, it's that working girl. You know that amazing Prada advert? I think it's spring/summer '96. It might be spring/summer '95. And she's wearing like a pleated, slightly printed skirt and then a cardigan, and she's like arguing with a man in an office. You know, and it's like that kind of the lip print, exactly. And it is that kind of thing of like working woman, but then it's also not, because you've got all this like the bedroom shoes.
Well, there's always an oddness, isn't there?
Yeah, very much so.
Odd iciness.
But it's always quite serious.
Isn't it? With intellectual, which is ridiculous. It's funny when you think about it, 'cause she's wearing like a big bird skirt, but then you look at her and you're like, she is a serious woman who knows her way of life.
Marabou bralette.
It's quite fabulous. So.
But again, you know, you take the styling away and there's just a blue chalk stripe shirt with a large collar, a navy pencil skirt, like a very short pencil skirt.
But maybe that goes back to what we're saying is that thing of trying to make it more appealing to a millennial, which is trying to communicate these more accessible or wearable pieces in an exciting way. So actually, rather than saying, oh, we're going to make this amazing catwalk proposition and then you can go to the shop and buy a nice shirt or some black trousers, they're trying to mix that into the runway. Because that is also what Gucci do well, is like, and it's the Dries thing you mentioned, is like putting everything on the runway and then everything is available in store, rather than doing that hold back thing.
Rather than selling encyclopedias.
Exactly. I really like that as a message.
There's so much going on, isn't it? There's sort of a way boxy cuts on the body, and then you've got a thigh split skirt with feather trim.
And then the kind of 70s wallpaper print. But it is that what I love about her is like the way she references her own work. So you always look at it and you try and spot the Prada collection within there, and you're like those printed skirts, those kind of strange prints.
And the checks as well.
Yeah, completely.
Ginghams.
And all quite flat shoes.
Well, you do think of a kind of clumpy sandal.
Clumpy sandal, slide.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the problem. I think with the words we're using, like clumpy, icy, like there's a very specific
wear. It's tricky to wear. It's not easy to wear, and it's not easy to mix. Like that's why I love it, because I think it's like you have to want to wear Prada. It's not like throw it on and you're gonna like.
You wouldn't feel frivolous, would you? You wouldn't feel fun.
Yeah,
you'd feel serious and austere and fashionable.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, I love it, but it's very, very different feel to Gucci, isn't it? And
Definitely.
You know, it's
more
more covered up.
It's just not warm.
Well,
even though it
really
isn't, because the skirts are short.
No,
like,
you're
in
right.
a way,
Yeah, that's interesting.
You don't buy it to be like, I'm going to step into this fantasy, unless the fantasy is like buying something luxury good. It's not. It doesn't really take you away. No. It brings you into her world, but it's definitely like maybe a cold, icy, clumpy one.
Yeah. It's getting progressively madder as it goes.
It'd be interesting to know what the music was like in this section, though. If it was still a somber.
She's good at mixing in lots and lots of different soundtracks together. It's interesting what we were talking about before with like stuff, because there's a lot of stuff in this. You know, like belts. Like it's all very mixed together.
And all these optical effects on the knitwear, I guess, and jackets. You can't quite tell if it's embellishment or a print.
Or a print,
Whereas those sort of little dinner dresses with pleats are very quintessential Prada land.
What I always think about, what I do think is clever about it, is when you do see it in the store, is they have pieces which can look incredibly fashion-y, but then when you see them, you're like, oh, actually, this would appeal to an older, conservative customer. Like, I really thought that when they did the top stitching, like when you saw people wearing it at Fashion Week, it looked so fashion statement. But then I saw like a brown leather jacket in one of the stores, and I was like, oh no, this is like an old Italian man. That doesn't really appeal. And you do think that a bit with like the
that contrast as well. I think that obviously it makes it seasonless. You know, it's that she's working with contrast, and therefore you can't actually put a word to describe it. You can't put it in a box because there's a little bit of everything in there.
This is definitely more like that though, than it's less cohesive. You know, like if you think even like 2 years ago, you'd be like, oh, the Faces collection, you know, with all the colourful furs, or you'd be like this or that. This is definitely much less that. Like I think pieces from this collection are much, like they could be Prada from 5 years ago, they could be Prada from 10 years ago, so that it is less, this is my vision for the season.
Do you think it's more kind of maybe more as a styling exercise than like a product that has then been styled rather than like a cohesive story even?
Feels like that more, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like she's got you know, it's not like the golf collection. You know, like for a long time, Prada, you could almost sum up those collections in one word, you know, whereas this doesn't feel like that in the same way.
And it doesn't look as though it's got the sort of normal divisions of day into evening.
No.
It's all sort of zigzagging around.
I like these Nehru collar, this random Nehru collar that pops up.
The prints are just very, very referenced, aren't they, from the previous seasons, and that's quite hard to get past for me. You know, that makes it not feel so new.
I love all this frou though.
I know.
I like the
so that she's
on the
quite good at
trousers.
doing like a kind of fetishy thing, and quite, you know, it is like. You know, Carrie in Sex and the City, where she buys like the shoes with the marriage trivial sexy. It's kind of like, but she's good at doing things that are quintessentially very feminine or sexy, and then doing it in a kind of twisty way. Like it is like pajamas, bedroom wear.
But even the element that feels new, with the feathers, that's kind of referencing that paillettes and feathers collection.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite Miu Miu though, which is interesting because it's quite like, you could imagine that in a Miu Miu collection where it's more.
But is that just because, like you were saying, it's becoming more blurred between the two,
Maybe.
more than what we think Miu Miu should be?
Yeah, that's true.
These looks you could imagine suiting a younger woman as well. So it's like, you know.
I think what's also interesting, because for me, what I think of when I think of Prada women's wear, especially, is always the model casting. I always think of these like pushing the boundaries on what the idea of beauty is. But the girls here seem to be they're very young, but they're very classic beauty. Like I don't really think of that odd, quirky girl that they used to do. Like, you know, for the past maybe 5 years, that they've had this almost like weird looking girl.
I really don't like Prada's casting. I think it's really white and really young.
It is really
like
white,
it's just I think, you know, talking about the mood of the times as well, I also think that's part of the problem with the shows is the casting just feels really, I know casting in all fashion shows is like hideously white, but
this season there was, because normally the problem we found is there's not many options. This season was amazing.
Yeah, that's good.
Something worked for us. I mean, we had a hard time casting European girls like that. The strength that the agencies brought over the African and the Far Asian and the Indians were Asian. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's great. So there's just like more variety.
Which in fairness hasn't been there.
No, like a few seasons ago. Like
a lot of designers did say that. They would say, "Oh, we get a lot of criticism for our casting, but actually we can't get more than like."
But that's definitely, you can see it
girl.
changing this season from our perspective. And so when people aren't using that or saying there's nothing out there, like there's a lot of really great girls now.
Whereas like 2 seasons ago, we'd see 300 girls come in for a casting for our shows, and 7 of them would be African girls, and 2 would be Chinese or Japanese girls. And it's like you can't really make an edit from that. You know?
So
again, it's just another thing that maybe feels less of the times. Like because it's really noticeable, like as you're looking through, oh, this isn't like a whitewashed cast. It kind of feels a bit like
it just feels out of step, doesn't it?
It really
doesn't feel. And it's a shame because the collection is kind of, it is quite whimsical in a way, and it's weird because we were talking about it being quite melancholy, but actually when you look at the close-ups, it's almost
it's quite jolly.
It's quite Guccified in a way, you know. It's quite.
I like all these sort of mini skirt with the knickers underneath, like an old bathing suit.
And the
well, that's that thing of it being kind of like. That weirdly, it's sexy in this really kind of quite sick way sometimes.
Also like the odd-sized pockets. Doesn't because it kind of looks like she's put her jacket on wrong. But like all 4 of the pockets are kind of like.
Like what?
I'm not good.
There's a lot of. It's really funny watching it. There is a lot of. It's very Prada. Maybe it is also about that thing of hammering home the Prada aesthetic, which is these kind of odd shapes, you know, that you think about slightly odd fitting. Like when I think of Prada men's, I always think of a slightly strange fitting trouser. So for the women's, it's kind of oddly fitting stuff. These prints that they do look like they're lifted out of like the 1996, 1995 archive. Little things like, you know, the polar neck under the shirt, so Prada, like a lot of, maybe it is about flexing aesthetic muscle and saying, you know, this is what we do.
And these little badges on all the little badges and icons that look like a sunset.
But it is maybe, you understand if they're doing a strategy that's trying to appeal more to millennials, I imagine that there's just more stuff, isn't there? There's more kind of...
It's really exciting on the bags. All that clash of paint and print and...
I really like the feathers. It's fabulous. I want to like wear that to work and be like, excuse me.
But that's it also, I mean, even if it's kind of starting to have more to offer, it's also about, not too little too late, but it's also about getting people to actually see it and starting that whole process. It's not kind of an instant fix, it's something that has to kind of be worked out and people have to follow.
Well, that was what was interesting. It was actually just on the BBC. I was reading it when I was doing my research. And the BBC wrote this thing just about how their strategy for approaching millennials. And like half of the article was about like approaching e-commerce in a more open way, getting more product out there so you could buy more shoes and bags. They talked a bit about price points, so, you know, trying to make sure that the offer is a bit broader. But then about the other half of the article was about this idea of like actually just getting more stuff on social media and expanding their online presence. So it's exactly what you say, so people see it and people engage with it, which is what Gucci have been so good at.
You've got to expand their culture of Prada.
Exactly, the culture, because I think people just don't know.
Who is the Prada woman?
And all those interesting little, you know, they do so much with the art world, but I feel like unless you're in Milan at the Prada Foundation, look at an amazing exhibition, you don't know. So maybe it is about doing these interesting hookups, these collaborations.
But it's also back to what we were saying about people actually wearing their clothes. I mean, social media is so important, but at the same time, we all know that after 5 minutes, you're actually not really taking anything in. So for me, like the real part of it is when it's actually seeing people in the street or seeing friends wearing it. That's when it really sinks in that, oh my God, that's an amazing coat or whatever. Like social media is important to kind of kind of subliminally get it in there.
Do you think part of the problem is Prada actually very rarely gets ripped off by the high street because it's quite difficult to rip off? And I wonder if that's also part of the reason why it doesn't feel like it's part of the mood of the season, because something like Saint Laurent, or even Gucci in a way, or Vetements, they're kind of, you feel that aesthetic everywhere because you go into a Zara, or you go into a Topshop, and it's there.
Dress.
But Prada, you never really, like I've never felt like a Prada collection happens, then suddenly it's the mood of fashion.
It's because it's so forward.
Yeah.
It's so forward. It's like it's a few steps ahead. You know, it's in a different world. It's in a different. It's in a different space. I don't know what it is because I mean, I've come from Topshop and we all love Prada, but you just wouldn't.
Well,
it just doesn't feel right.
It's the quality because like I mean, you look at some of those shoes and they were like these kitten heels with weird synthetics on it, and if it wasn't done to the top quality, that'd just be an ugly shoe. I mean, it's kind of an ugly shoe right now, but because the quality and craftsmanship that goes into it, it's actually going to be like great. But if you saw those at a market, you can imagine those at a market in any place in London, and you wouldn't buy them, but you would buy them because something about the quality that goes
but
into
even
well, it's hard to do ugly on the cheap.
But that's what we were saying. Like, if the Prada woman's this odd, clunky, serious woman who doesn't want to have fun,
good thing we're not in the marketing department.
I think we should be like ugly and weird.
But that's not something that the high street necessarily are going to want to jump on.
It's not a quick sell,
no,
is it?
It's not. It's like you said, it's for a more intellectual person. Like, they're beautiful clothing. It's just, it takes a little bit of work to understand it and to see, this is how I'm going to interpret it into my wardrobe.
It is challenging, it's intellectual.
And that is needed.
And it's painting, and you can see your love of art in it, because if you take away the fact that they're functional garments, I do think you see that it's actually a painter working with different textures and different palette of prints and solids, and you can imagine the sketches being on a canvas.
Yeah, it is kind of cinematic and just like amazing in that sense of it's not hard to rip off. It's not easy to rip off. I mean, it's hard fashion. Like it's clever and it feels like it took toil and work, and it's.
Seeing the lineup like this actually makes much more sense. When it's like flicking through the images slowly, kind of, it feels really disparate, but actually seeing there's a progression.
It does definitely get more cheerful. It is a bit, it's not that day to night thing, but it is kind of in a way. Like, she starts quite serious and then it's like she gets more and more eccentric as it goes. Mrs. Prada looks chic. She's wearing trousers. I love it when she wears trousers.
That's quite unusual.
It's quite unusual. She's always in a skirt. But yeah, looking fighting spirit. Do we like it as a collection?
I love the feathery things.
I like the close-ups. I wasn't a fan of it seeing the full garments, but then when we saw the close-ups and seeing it more abstracted, like a painting and like a canvas, I thought it was wonderful. But
it won't make sense for like a week though. In a week we'll have to all report back because we'll be like, that's what it was about. I do like I like it when Mrs. Prada does Prada, when it feels like she's doing what she does best, and
this does feel that.
Like, you would not mistake it for anything else. Like, even those pieces, like, I just think it's the prints. It's the prints and the kind of strange colour mixes and.
Yeah, for me it's more the seriousness mixed with the oddness that she really kind of. I think that's really what she originated. There's lots of designers now who kind of have reappropriated that kind of blend, but I think that's when it feels really Prada to me.
It's like she works, particularly at that shot of the three models, it's like they work at a company which caters to people with fetishes about librarians. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, I'm very serious and I work in the British Library.
But underneath this frumpy cardigan,
I have
I'm
wearing But I think what's interesting for me, and it is going back to what you're saying with like innovating in interesting ways, is I feel excited to see how it grows and develops over the next year or so, because I do think it's an interesting time for Prada and they have to focus on more than just the clothes. And I'm interested to see, what hookups they're going to do, what interesting collaborations, how they're going to change their social media. They're doing the winter series Mimi Films, which is really interesting. The women's tales, not the winter's tales. And I wonder if they're going to do something interesting like that, seeing how they get their message out there.
Because it's never really done Prada's not had a collaboration with H&M with Adidas. With
No.
She's always more elevated.
Just feels so removed. Even like with video content, like they did, I always talk about it on every panel, but they did that amazing animated film, Trembled Blossoms, which is amazing. And then they kind of never really experimented in a sizable kind of innovative way with doing interesting, an amazing collaboration with an amazing, like, artistic filmmaker. It's always like Wes Anderson.
Stopped then.
Well, they did those the Wes Anderson ones, but it's never like something niche or weird that you stumble across. It's always very like big.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like whereas Gucci is so good, I was talking about this yesterday, so I sound like a broken record, but like, they're very good at doing these kind of strange little pop-up things that happen across their Snapchat, or suddenly there's something on Instagram, whereas Prada, it's quite, it goes back to the seasonal thing we're saying. It's like they have a campaign, and it's big, and they do the big campaign, or they do a big film with Wes Anderson, or they do a big there's not these little touch points and these little happenings.
And that's what people actually want.
That's what you need now.
Yeah. It's almost too epic, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's nothing rolling.
There's nothing rolling.
It's not the zine of, I guess, today's digital media.
Like,
it's
not
it's more instant.
In our age, when you found like the little flyer about some punk show at a record shop, you'd pick it up and you'd feel like you're a part of this clique. And I think you need those smaller projects.
You need the smaller things. I think you're right.
But that also goes with, social media is so important, but at the same time, everyone's getting sick of it, and everyone's desperate to pull away from it, but kind of can't. It's like this horrible drug. And so when things like that come into the real world and there are these little moments, that feels much more exciting and authentic. And people want to be part of that.
I think that is what they need to do, is just have less. It's interesting you said it's too epic. Like, it just feels too. There's not enough. You need to discover things on your own. It needs to be surprising, because the collections are so surprising. They're really. You never know what you're expecting, and it needs to feel more like their business strategy is like that as well, and less predictable.
But what would those moments be in the librarian shops?
I have no idea. That's why I think like she's so amazing.
You could take little adverts and stick it in every single English classic. So when people would check it
good.
out from the library,
that's
it's
really,
like
really good. Or they could do like a collaboration with the British Library.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
I think we've got really good suggestions. They should definitely pay us to consult. Well, should we give Mrs. Prada a round of applause for giving us lots of stuff to talk about and for producing an amazing collection? Thanks, guys.